Think of the periodic table, you probably remember a chart hanging on the front wall of your chemistry class, an asymmetric expanse of columns and rows looming over one of your teacher's shoulders. The chart is usually enormous, 6 feet and 4 feet, a size both daunting and appropriate given its importance in chemistry. On one hand, the periodic table seems to be organized and honed, almost German engineered for maximum scientific utility. On the other hand, it is a jumble of long numbers, abbreviations, and what looks to the world like computer error messages. It is hard not to feel anxious. And although the periodic table obviously has something to do with other sciences, like such as biology and physics, it isn't clear how exactly. Probably my biggest frustration when I look at this is how do I read it? It is probably the same irritation colorblind people must be feeling when they are not able to find the sevens and the nines in the party-colored dot diagrams that the fully sighted are clearly able to see. Crucial but hidden information that never quite resolves itself into coherence. People remember the table with fascination, fondness, inadequacy, and loathing. Let's start and understand how your periodic table looks like. And when you're trying to do that, let's remove all the letters and jargon that's there in between. And let's look at it as a skeleton. So what does it look like? It looks like sort of a castle with an uneven main wall, as if the royal masons hadn't quite finished the building. It has got tall and defensive turrets at both ends. It has got 18 jagged columns and 7 horizontal rows with a landing strip of 2 extra rows hanging below. The castle is made up of bricks, and the first non-obvious thing about it is that the bricks are not interchangeable. The brick is an element or a type of a substance. As of now, like already discussed, it has got 118 elements. And the entire castle would crumble if those bricks really did not sit where it does. That's no exaggeration. If scientists determined one element somehow fit into a different slot, or that 2 elements could be swapped, then the entire edifice would tumble down. Another architectural curiosity is that the castle is made up of different materials in different areas. That is, not all bricks are made up of the same substance, nor do they have the same characteristics. 75% of the bricks are metals, which basically means these elements are cold gray solids, at least at temperatures that humans are used to. A few columns on the eastern side contain gases. Only 2 elements, mercury and bromine, are liquids at room temperatures. In between the metals and the gases, about here, lie some hard-to-define elements whose amorphous nature gives them interesting properties, and they are known as metalloids. The reason for lingering over the blueprints of the castle wall is that the coordinates of an element determine nearly everything scientifically interesting about it. For each element, its geography is its destiny, which means where you are determines what you are. In fact, now that you have a sense of what the table looks like in its outline, I can switch to a more useful metaphor, the periodic table as a map. And to sketch it in a bit more detail, I'm going to plot this map from east to west. First up, in column 18, at the far right-hand side of the table is a set of elements known as noble gases. Noble because these elements, like nobility, don't interact with commoners. That is, they don't react with other elements and they remain noble. They act this way for a reason. Before we understand that, we will need to know more about this elusive particle known as electron. This, I should warn you, defies common sense because electrons, you see, obeys the bizarre rules of modern physics known as quantum mechanics. The whole pain point of science today has been to give you a theory which will connect the macroscopic world to the microscopic world. When I say macroscopic, I'm talking about things that you can see through your naked eye. That is, formulating theory about how the earth goes around the sun. And when I say microscopic, I'm telling you about how the atoms behave. Unfortunately, till now, there is not a single unified theory that connects both the macroscopic and the microscopic. You might have studied that there is a positively charged nucleus and the electrons are revolving around this. This analogy is fine for now, but one quick caveat. Don't get too attached to the image of electrons as discrete pinheads flashing about a solid core. Or, in the more usual metaphor, don't necessarily think of electrons as planets circling a nucleic sun. The planet analogy is useful, but that is not what it actually is. We can look into the details as we move higher up the education ladder. Anyway, wrap your head around this. All atoms contain negative particles called electrons, which reside in different tiers or energy levels inside the atom. The levels are nested concentrically inside each other, and each level needs a certain number of electrons to fill itself and feel satisfied. In the innermost level, that number is 2. In other levels, it is usually 8. Elements normally have equal number of negative electrons and positive particles called protons, so they are electrically neutral. Electrons, however, can be freely traded between atoms, and when atoms gain or lose electrons, they form charged atoms called ions. And the modern periodic table is all arranged based on the number of electrons that is present in the outermost tier or energy level in the atom. Now you know the first column will have elements which have 1 electron in its outermost shell, and the last will have the shell complete. What's important to know is that atoms fill their inner or lower energy levels as full as possible with their own electrons and then share, or steal electrons to secure the right number in the outermost level. Some elements share or trade electrons diplomatically, while others act very, very nasty. That's half of chemistry in one sentence for you. Atoms that don't have enough electrons in the outer shell will fight, barter, beg, make or break alliances, or do whatever to get the right number. Helium, element 2, has exactly the number of electrons it needs to fill its outer level. This closed configuration gives helium tremendous independence because it doesn't need to interact with other atoms or share or steal electrons to feel satisfied. What's more, the same configuration extends down the entire 18th column beneath helium. The gases neon, argon, krypton, xenon, and radon, all these elements have closed shell with full complements of electrons. So none of them react with anything under normal conditions. That's why, despite all the forward activity to identify and label elements in the 1800s, including the development of the periodic table itself, no one isolated a single gas from column 18 before 1895.
This is what I will want to say about the noble gases. He who adores the perfect and unchangeable and scorns the corruptible and ignoble will prefer the noble gases by far to all other elements, for they never vary, never waver, never pander to other elements like hoi polloi offering cheap wares in the marketplace. They are incorruptible and ideal.
In this column, next to the noble gases, sits the most energetic and reactive gases on the periodic table, the halogens. They react violently with elements which sit on the first column called the alkali metals. The halogens has 7 electrons in its outermost layer, 1 short of the octet they need, while alkalis have 1 electron in the outermost level and a full octet in the level below. So it's natural for the latter to dump their extra electron on the former and the resulting positive and negative ions to form these strong links.
This sort of linking happens all the time, and for this reason, electrons are the most important part of an atom. They take up virtually all of an atom space, like clouds swirling around an atom's compact core, the nucleus. That is true even though the components of the nucleus, the protons and the neutrons, are far bigger than individual electrons. Now, if an atom was blown up to the size of a cricket stadium, the proton-rich nucleus would be just a tennis ball at the pitch, and the electrons would be like pinheads flashing around it very, very fast, knocking into you so many times that you would not be even able to enter the stadium. It will be like a solid wall. And as a result, whenever atoms touch, the nucleus is mute and only the electrons matter.
Bonding between ions explains why combination of halogens and alkalis such as sodium chloride, that's table salt, are common. Similarly, elements from column 2 with 2 extra electrons such as calcium and elements from columns that need 2 electrons such as oxygen frequently align themselves. It's the easiest way to meet everyone's needs. Overall, you can usually tell at a glance how elements will combine by noting their column number and figuring out their charges. The pattern all falls out of the table's right-left symmetry. Reading the periodic table across each row reveals a lot about the elements, but that's only a part of the story, not even the best part. Elements in the same column, latitudinal neighbors, are actually far more intimately related than horizontal neighbors. People are used to reading from left to right in virtually every human language, but reading the periodic table from up to down, column by column, as in some forms of Japanese, is actually more significant.